Good evening and a very warm welcome to the G5A Foundation for Contemporary Culture. My name is Komalika and I speak on behalf of all of us here at G5A. It is indeed a privilege to co-host the launch of The Foot Soldier of the Constitution by Teesta Setalvad and to have all of you join us here for this evening. Thank you, Anupama, for connecting all of us. G5A is a not-for-profit center for contemporary culture where we passionately believe that art and culture have the power to ignite change for the better. With this platform, we encourage and support creativity, criticality, and courage, and hope that by showcasing the contemporary in all its shapes and forms, we are able to create an ecosystem that not only nurtures art and artists, but also builds audiences that are sensitive and supportive. And most importantly, patrons that are both visionary and brave.
Welcome to the third Literature Live evening of this year, the launch of Foot Soldier of the Constitution, a memoir by Teesta Setalvad. I would like to thank our partners, the G5A Foundation for Contemporary Culture, Leftward Books, New Delhi, and Kitab Khana, Mumbai, for their support in helping this event take place.
I'm deeply honored to be here for this particular event. Teesta and Javed have been old friends from even before this. The book starts with the Bhiwandi riots, but I think we knew each other even before that. And we've probably gone through the same journey in different ways. It gives me great pleasure to read from her book because I consider her to be one of the citizens of India. I call her citizen because I'm not going to say brave because I think this is what everybody should be doing. It's not something, it shouldn't be extraordinary, but unfortunately it is. I reached Gujarat in early March 2002. I began to scout the relief camps and districts, then returned back to Ahmedabad, exhausted. Late into the night, I would pen the alerts for the statutory bodies, the Supreme Court, the President of India, NHRC, and other human rights forums. The overwhelming sense when I described things back home to Mumbai was, if Bombay 10 years ago was bad, then Gujarat is 1,000 times worse. In the first 6 months, I was physically attacked 5 times. Twice the drivers of hired vehicles abandoned me in villages, fearful of the consequences of the journeys for them. Within days of the coverage, a resolve shaped into a dogged commitment based on these dual experiences of having lived through Bombay 1992-1993 and now Gujarat 2002. Mere documentation and advocacy and campaigning on the targeted mass crimes that exposed bitter fault lines of bias and prejudice in our institutions of democracy and governance would not be enough. It was time to test the criminal justice system from several angles. Can justice ever be done when mass violence happens? Can our courts restore the faith in the system? People's confidence and trust in their neighborhoods and even their friends had been snatched away.
My acquaintance with Teesta goes back from the time that from the section that I'll be reading. But as I read it, I thought I knew these events, and as I read it, I thought how much I don't know about the events, and how much else has been going on, which Teesta and Javed and others have been so. Well, I don't want to use the word brave, as Anand has already said that that's inadequate for what's required to proceed with this. I'll just go ahead with the reading. The events of 92-93 in Bombay pushed me into a major shift from journalist to activist. It was not the Gujarat pogrom of 2002 that moved me in that direction. By 2002, I was already an activist. We started Sabrang and Communalism Combat in August 1993. The riot in the mind simmers for months before it spills out onto the streets, leaving no space for dialogue. The raison d'etre of starting Communalism Combat was to somehow use our skills as journalists to prevent this riot from spilling out onto the streets. We wanted to deconstruct hate politics, encourage voices of peace and hope. We believed always that there are many paths and not a single narrative to show us the way. One of the reasons we started Communalism Combat was that we wanted to look at the shadows and silences of the mainstream media. We wanted to look at why the media doesn't report on what should be obvious stories. Mainstream journalism's increasing impatience with tracking the build-up to conflict, tracing its fallout, was another reason behind our move to create our magazine. In Combat, we have believed in trying to set the agenda for larger publications. In a sense, edging and nudging the media to do what it ought to do. The decreased interest of the news curve and short memories makes one thing topical today, forgotten the next. But Communalism Combat and Sabran have tried hard not to fall prey to this short-term thinking, while at the same time trying to remain relevant.
Welcome to another Literature Live evening. This is the third one we are holding at G5A, and it's a beautiful space. Anuradha Parikh, thank you so much for designing it and running it and collaborating with us. Every time, take a bow. Every time we've had an event here, it's always been full. I don't know if that has to do with G5A, Literature Live, or the author. I think maybe something to do with the author. Now, Teesta is, I think, gone beyond being a writer. She's gone beyond being a journalist. And as I mentioned in my covering note to the invitation, she's a real heroine. I think she's one of the bravest people I know. I am associated with her not just as a friend, but as one of the founding trustees of the Citizens of Justice and Peace, which was formed soon after the Gujarat carnage. I am now, for what it's worth, the president, but it's Teesta and her husband Javed who do all the work. And the work they do is tremendous, for which the nation at large does not say any thanks, but in fact maligns them. And those of you who know her know what she does, but there's a huge number of people who don't know her personally, obviously. And they know what they read in the newspapers. And the newspapers are full of fabrications put out by official agencies. I could go into detail, but perhaps Sidharth would like to do that during the conversation. But just to give you an example, if she used a credit card which paid for her personal expenses as well as for travel for the work she's doing for the CJP, but what she billed to the CJP was obviously for the work. But the CBI said, oh, she's using the credit card to go to restaurants, for branded clothes. That's a famous sentence. For whatever, I don't know what it means, branded clothes. I wear Fab India. Is that a branded? That's also branded. But the impression in the general public that is sought to be created is that, oh, here's another NGO misusing funds. It's a kind of an Orwellian doublespeak. And it has been consistently going for the last 2 or 3 years. The bank accounts of CJP have been frozen for 2 years now. Teesta and Javed's personal bank accounts have been frozen. Now can you imagine the hardship this causes? And there's no valid reason for it. The only valid reason is that a battle is being fought, and that battle is against the establishment which has gone rogue. And when the establishment goes rogue, the only way it can fight is through these means. Already Teesta's book has been translated into 7 languages.
I've known Teesta when she was just out of college, an eager journalist. I was one too, a city reporter. Teesta, I think we ran into each other at all kinds of places. And even then one could see, Javed was of course a veteran. And, in journalism there are no hierarchies, so we all mixed. And even then one could see that Teesta was doing stories which were very, very unusual, which were breaking stories, very unusual for a youngster at that time. I still think of you as a youngster, Teesta, I can't help it. And she reminded me when I read the book, it's a very easy read, by the way. The subject is very serious, but it flows. And when I read the book, the book reminded me of Bhiwandi, which most of us may have forgotten. There was a terrible riot at Bhiwandi. Bhiwandi, in journalism, and more so now because of television, if it is somewhere where your reporter can't reach, it doesn't exist. But some journalists went there. I remember I went. The story that is mentioned, which you wrote about, Javed, of those people burnt in their home, that entire house burned down. And so she's been doing that kind of thing from then. However, I must tell you, we are going to discuss the book. The book has got a lot more to Teesta. It tells you how she reached where she did, and it's got charming anecdotes about growing up in Bombay of a different time, her family, and we are going to be talking mainly about the book. And Teesta, so I'm going to begin by asking you about, you talk about growing up in Juhu and your father, very egalitarian, informal man, you called him by his first name, very unusual. But you also talk about your family and your your ancestors in the sense of Sir Chimanlal Setalvad, and that famous interrogation of General Dwyer. Please tell us about that. I mean, I was fascinated by that part.
Well, it was a very, very privileged family to grow up in, and the name was there, the heritage was there. But somehow we were also taught to wear it lightly. We were not told to kind of be pompous about it and all. So we wore it lightly. Like one of my favorite anecdotes is my sister and me, both of us are very tuneless, singing this ditty of about 7 generations of the Setalvads, and only realized later it was very patriarchal because we only sang the male names, So it was Atul, Motilal, Chimanlal, Har Rai, Bridge Rai, Setalvad, kind of thing. So it was about reading about me. Dada was alive till I was 12. And
And you must have spoken to him about a lot of things.
A lot of things, and his autobiography came out, My Life, Law and Other Things, which was a big thing. Tripathi brought it out in that old, dodgy publishing house. And so the book, we all read the book, and so the general and my great-grandfather's biography, in fact, has not been republished, which is what one hopes to do soon. So the General Dyer thing was very important because there were 5 Indian members of the commission.
Yes.
And they obviously dissented from the British members of the commission, and he's the one who actually cross-examined Dyer and got him to admit that he fired.
And it's a very chilling, it's quite chilling when you think about it, the way Dyer answers. I leave it to you to get the book and read it. But, Teesta, it must have also been a kind of legacy that must have sunk in at some stage while you were growing up, that it's about justice, it's about law and the constitution, and then foot soldier of the constitution. It's a very critical part of what your work is, isn't it?
Yeah, and like I also say in the book, the naive belief that the courts always deliver justice and will always or should always deliver. The belief you grow up with that the courts ought to or should or will always deliver justice, which also unfortunately is not the case. So there's been that orientation always that it is through the courts that the constitutional vision can really be.
And that you must rely on the law.
Yeah, understanding of the law. Yeah.
But we'll come to that in detail later on, but you quickly find out that there is institutional bias. You quickly find out that there is institutional prejudice. And also that the institutions sometimes can go very much against the spirit and letter of the law.
Yeah.
And I think you should illustrate that.
Well, one chilling, for me, very chilling instance was when, after the Bombay violence, when my father appeared for J.B. D'Souza and Dilip Thakur. The petition was filed on the basis of the writings in the Samna, which we discovered as we read the Samna that from July of 1991 there had been provocative writing. It didn't begin just during the violence, and there had been systematically provocative
So
writing.
it's a myth to think that it was because of the Babri Masjid thing. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
So there was a sort of a build-up through hate speech in the Samna. So all this material was translated and the petition was filed, and it was an exercise in trying to get petitioners also, because there was a lot of very fearful Bombay at that time. And when the petition was filed and it came up in the Bombay High Court, I remember my father, the prayer was that direction for an FIR against Bal Thackeray. That was the prayer. And I remember the judges saying, but if we do that, Bombay will burn. And my father, I remember replying, saying, but Bombay is burning anyway. So that's really the point. The point is that the entire system has backpedaled when it ought to intervene. I mean, look at what happened in the JNU. In the DU, day before yesterday.
Yes. Well, even JNU in the
Yeah, but
sense
DU,
that,
DU day before yesterday was the same thing, that if you don't actually stop the violence, the people who are actually perpetrating the violence, you're just backpedaling all the time. And the kids who were bashed up, they don't have an FIR against the ABVP still.
And you I want to connect this to a much later event in your book where you talk about how Aspi Chinoy had to argue for 5 hours. Yeah? Tell us about that.
This was the first case that CJP took up, the first case that we took up in April 2002. I know people may not remember this, but Gujarat was the first time where the state refused to run relief camps. It refused to run relief camps. So earlier you had at least that tokenism, that the state would, whether Musafir Khana in Bombay or wherever, even if community leaders ran the camps, the state would support it with financially and with wherewithal. Gujarat, the state didn't do that. So the first petition we filed was to try and get the state to pay for the food, the milk, the masala, the tea that was being supplied by these community leaders in the relief camps. So we collected all that data and we filed this in April, and we wanted Aspi to go and argue it. And Aspi had of course gone through the petition and the draft. He's very meticulous on that. And then something came up in Bombay, so he couldn't make it. He was finding it difficult. So he said, Teesta, I can't go. I said, Aspi, you can't do this at the last minute. He said, I'm sure you can find one lawyer in Gujarat to do this. I think you're exaggerating when you're saying that nobody is going to appear on this matter. I said, okay, Aspi, I trust you completely. You find me a lawyer who satisfies you, and I'm through. Then you don't have to go. Aspi, being Aspi and honest, he called back to us later and said, I'm sorry, Teesta, I've cancelled my Bombay thing. Not only am I going, I'm not charging CJP for the ticket. And he had to stand for 5 hours simply to get the state to give set amount of milk, water, etc., to the camps. The judge was Justice Majumdar. Either they were scared or they were abdicated. I mean, why did the Gujarat High Court not take so more to notice 2 of their judges were attacked? One sitting and one retired.
Yeah. Now, again, coming back to 92, 93, all of us here, more or less all of us here, remember those days. It's seared in our collective and individual memory. There was a case of police completely going berserk. You haven't really mentioned it in detail, but I'm sure you remember the Suleiman Bakery incident, for example. Now, what happened with the police? What do you think happened then with the police?
That is also something we began tracking collectively and individually from about 84, 80. But I think it really became very, very evident in 92, 93. Because I think the Hari Masjid case, Kurla, Suleiman, there are about 16, 17 instances where the bias was so rampant. And I think Bombay 92, 93 actually got some of us to write and highlight this issue as like you said, as institutional bias. It was at that time that within a few months combat got established, and that time we got Vibhuti Narayan Rai, Padma Rosha, KF Rustamji, who founded the BSF, Border Security Force. He was one of the most vocal spokespersons for the fact that unless the force admits the bias, the problem is that there's no admission of the bias. The 9th Police Commission says that there is communal bias. Racism in America, at least at some level, there is institutional admission that it exists, even though you still have the kind of anti-black firings that you had over the last 6-8 months. Our reluctance in India to admit to the bias, and I call it an lapse of institutional memory. All Riot Commission reports talk about police bias, and they talk about a bias towards the Hindutva right wing. And yet, the judicial cases have not prosecuted these perpetrators. So it's like the commission reports say this, but in effect, there's a complete disconnect between the institutional memory.
Well, the Shiv Sena leader with guns in his car, Sarpodar, never went to jail even for half a day. And so many more things. Now, if you have that kind of a situation, police, which is supposed to look after people firing in the wrong direction, the courts then not taking notice and all that, where does the citizen go? I'm not even talking about, let's say, the collective. I mean, let's say a riot, though a riot is the wrong word to use, I don't like to use it. But let's say that kind of mass trouble, with two men released after 12 years and their youth lost. Mohammed Amir Khan, if you read his story, it's shocking. Where does the citizen go?
See, that's the task which is
And if I may say so, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, I'm sorry that the media has also abdicated its role. So where does the citizen?
I mean, that's a question for all of us. It's not. I don't have all the answers, but I think one of the things we really need to do is to get the institutions to answer these questions, and that is the most difficult task. You had after Bombay, since we're talking about Bombay, 92-93, you had a situation where you first had the people's verdict, which is the citizens' report, Justice Suresh and Justice Daud's report, and soon after that, 5 years, you had the Shri Krishna Commission report. Now, Sabrang published the Shri Krishna Commission report. 60 rupees was the first edition, 90 rupees was the second edition. We sold it outside the High Court so that people could read it. And that report is a complete testimony to what happened in Bombay. It is an excellent document. But in terms of action against the perpetrators, in terms of correction of the institutional biases, nothing happened. In fact, I remember when I appeared before Shri Krishna, I was asked to depose. I presented him with the Madan Commission report, which was of Bhiwandi, not 84. Bhiwandi 1971, 72, 73. And I said, the same thing is happening here, 30 years, 25 years later, which means all the recommendations of the Madan Commission have been ignored. Simple things, like if a procession of one denomination is going past a mosque, they should be able to deposit 10,000 or 20,000 rupees so that anything happens, it is the responsibility of the leader of that profession to make sure that it is not violated. It's not done.
In fact, you have Vibhuti Narayan Rai's comment.
Yeah.
I think, so you need to tell us, I'm going to be asking you to tell us what he said and what does that mean in the larger scheme of things.
After my coverage of the Bombay riots, a lot of these police academies used to invite me. So the Masuri Academy for IAS officers and the Police Academy, Sidharth Bhatia Academy outside Hyderabad. So I was asked to deliver some lectures there, and when on a second such trip, I think it was 94, 95, or 96, 97, I met Vibhuti. Vibhuti was at that time doing his 1 year research on perceptions of the police among India's minorities. Okay, and I met this officer who was actually researching exactly what we've been talking about through a wide spectrum for India. And I did this interview. At that time, Combat was still in the tabloid format. We changed to the A4 in 98. And we did this cover story interview which said that communal riot can't last for more than 24 hours unless the state wants it to continue. And it was a long interview. It was a very, very long.
And he was already in service.
He was in service. He had just taken a 1 year sabbatical. And he retired only about 7, 8, 9 years ago. So I did that interview, and media was a little different then. You had Dina Vakil, I remember, in the Times and other people in the Express. And many mainstream newspapers would pick up our stories in abstract, as excerpts. So that Vibhuti's interview was actually picked up by almost 32, 33 publications of different languages. And the whole issue of communal bias in the force began to be foregrounded for many of us who were concerned with it.
So you mean there are individual police officers, even in Gujarat you pointed out about a couple of them, who are concerned, who want to do the right thing in whatever way they can. Is that your experience?
If you talk about really hard communal bias, I would say maybe only 30% are really biased. The large majority will go where the political class tells them to, because they are protecting their service and their promotions and their thing. But there is that 5 to 10, 15 maybe percent which is really very committed to the constitutional values, and you find them during every bout of violence. And the real heroes of Gujarat are R.B. Shikumar, Rahul Sharma, and I mean they while serving as officers, they made available documents which enable CJP to file petitions, including the Zakia Jafri case which is going on.
And have suffered for it.
And have suffered. Both of them have suffered. The state is still trying to make sure RB doesn't get his pension. They've gone up to the Supreme Court to try and take away the pension that we got him. By the way, CJP, thanks to lawyers, one name I can't mention because he's now a judge, the other one, Navroz Sidhwai, fought RB Shikumar's case for them. So, and the CAT, the Central Administrative Tribunal, gave exemplary orders, which actually I think law students should study, because the issue there was, does a serving officer have the right to depose in an official commission of inquiry, or does it actually defy the Official Secrets Act, if you please? That's what the government was trying to say, when he is actually performing his constitutional duty. And both cases, Rahul's and RB's first, the CAT gave very, very good judgments, which I think should be studied by all of us.
Yeah, actually, just a side note, when you were talking about how the police moves instinctively or deliberately towards the side where the winds are blowing, I'm reminded of what's going on campuses, where in every case the administrations have aligned themselves extremely well with the dispensation and the powers that be. In every case. So whether it's a college campus or a vice chancellor, coincidentally their thinking aligns with what's going on. So it's not, it's a far beyond that. This is how society has begun to shift. This is how people have begun to think, and it's getting worse. And again, you are a journalist, so at maybe a question or two down the line, you have to talk a bit about the media. Coming to Gujarat, now, so 92-93, as a person, you say kind of prepared you. You had become an activist. After that, you started combat. So you wrote a series of stories before 2002, where you said that a particular kind of mood is rising. What was that? How did you...
I used to feel very, very frustrated at that time, because I did those 5 stories. One was...
No, how did you come about? How did you think of doing those stories? Why did you think?
Because, I don't know, I covered Gujarat for Business India also before a couple of times, and I'd been tracking Gujarat and the growth of communal forces there. And I think maybe it was connected to that, the business of mainstream not doing that, not tracking what builds up to a conflict. And maybe the fact that you were also Gujarati and there were some roots there, but I kept going back there, and we did 5 stories, like 5 cover stories which I've written about. And I remember, things like, you didn't have, you had Muslim and Christian children giving exams on Eid and Christmas Day and Easter Day, and this is something we documented. Mainstream media also documented it in fits and starts. You had schools in the city of Ahmedabad which forced these kids to come, would tell these kids, don't bring eggs in your tiffin box. So everything that's happening now under full-blown Hindutva was already happening in Gujarat. In 98, I remember, August 98, for a period of 17 days, Randikpur and Sanjelia, 2 districts in the Panchmahals, became more infamous later with the Bilkis Banu gang rape case in 2002. But Randikpur and Sanjeli, for a period of 3 weeks, the Muslim inhabitants, and fairly a high number, had to stay out of their villages because the VHP decided and the Bajrang Dal decided that they can't stay in their own homes. And the PUCL Gujarat, Rohit Prajapati and Trupti and others had brought out this excellent report on this. And we had documented it into a cover story called Welcome to Hindu Rashtra. Because as you toured Gujarat, you would find villages with the board saying Welcome to Hindu Rashtra.
So it was no longer surreptitious, it was no longer subterranean, it was up there. Did you find this narrative emerging elsewhere in the papers?
See, like I said, you would always have fits and starts being reported in the newspapers. Newspapers had more space then than they have now for even good reportage. So you did have the news reports coming in. What was always missing was the linkages. Is to link the narrative up to a process which is sinister, to a process that is undermining the constitutional vision. I mean, that is what was happening in Gujarat. Whether it was in the bar, in the High Court, whether it was happening in the Bar Council, whether it was happening in the group of lawyers, the VHP started dominating the medical council group. Whether it was in schools, whether it was in education, it was literally like state and society being captured by these forces. And I remember still that our 10th anniversary issue, which I quote, Combat's 10th anniversary issue was after the pogrom, after the genocidal pogrom, 2003 August. And we did this thing asking many people to write about what they thought about combat. And Bala Gopal, who's no more with us, APLC with Hyderabad, he wrote this, he commented on the prescience of communalism combat in tracking Gujarat before 2002.
So this neatly brings me to the question, what has gone wrong with the media? Because there are times when we should be able to, these are times when we should be able to connect a lot of dots. And you are saying the big picture gets missed. Today, nobody is even looking at the dots. Forget the big picture. What has gone wrong? We've been in journalism, both of us, for a long time. Where do you see things having gone wrong?
I'll just say in bits and pieces. I think one of the things that has really gone completely awry is the fact that there's no beat coverage anymore. There's really no beat coverage. And I think beat coverage, it's a technical term we all journalists use, but it's very important for reporters to cover different beats, to do the university beat, the crime beat, the city beat, the Zilla Parishad beat. It's only then you understand systems of democracy and how they work, the court beat, the Killa court beat, whichever it is. You just don't have beat journalism anymore. So the youngsters who are being thrown into this coverage in fits and starts, and television has made it much worse, because you could be doing Shilpa Shetty today and doing something else tomorrow, and there is absolutely no I remember, for instance, the BMC, okay? We had the election results coming out. When we covered the BMC, it was always the richest corporation, the budget being bigger than many states. We would pour through the agendas of the standing committee every standing committee meeting on a Wednesday. We would pour through the agendas. They would come out only on Tuesday evening. And you'd get 6 byline stories there if you worked hard. Because you'd see escalation of contracts, and you stood outside the syndicate, and you see how the syndicate was a term for the cross-party corruption. They were the Muslim League, the BJP, the Shiv Sena, Congress, all benefiting.
It's corruption is very secular,
Yeah.
you got to admit that.
So we would, in 2 consecutive days, we would get our stories, But I find even those kind of elementary stories from the beat not coming today. You don't have that coverage of the BMC.
So that's a structural problem. I think there is a kind of there is a crisis that goes far beyond that too. And a lot of people blame managements, and that has its place, but there's something has gone seriously wrong. And I think when these kind of institutions start giving way, then you're heading for a situation when there's going to be silence.
I think the ownership patterns also need to be looked at. I mean, look, ownership patterns, and earlier you had these family-owned newspapers, maybe with a certain vision and a conscience. Express, you can't deny a conscience, even though it was mildly right-wing all the way, but it had a conscience. It got out the best beat, it got the best reporters out anyway. Television, for instance, you have the ownership pattern, couple of corporations owning most of the channels. I think that's very, very dangerous. But I think it's also got to do with the way journalists are very vulnerable in their pace. I remember I was also, one of the caps I wore was the BUJ, Bombay Union of Journalists. And contract journalism came in with Sameer Jain's model, as you know, for the Times of India. And he said, news is whatever little bit goes between advertising pages, and he actually proved that model right. And I remember we were the last people to hold out and saying we won't sign the contract. Contract meant you got 3 times more in terms of pay, but you had no security of service. And I think that security, people don't understand, but that security of service allows you to take risks, allows you to challenge your senior, allows you to dig your heels in, and allows you to say you want to do a certain story. You know, they can't just chuck you out. Today, I mean, you had Telegraph and HT in the last 1 month sacking 700 and 400 people. And there's not a whimper within journalists or within the newspapers. I find that shocking. You know? What do these people do after that? What do they do? I mean, it's all very well to criticize from the outside, but what do they do if you're so vulnerable and your job is so vulnerable? Yeah. And Telegraph is used to be one of the better papers, still one of the better papers, probably.
Yeah. So, all this is relating to what's going on today, but basically what we are saying is that all this is a continuum. Things have happened, and as you said, the writing was going on in July in Samna. After that, in Gujarat, you had begun to see patterns. So, by that token, when 2002 happened, whatever the trigger, it would have come to you as very little, no surprise really. No, in the sense of...
Something like that is always a surprise.
I realize that, but you could have seen, because, if you remember, and you'll know more than most, a lot of the people who were writing are perfectly decent middle class people, who went out and said, I'm going to kill my neighbor today. So you saw that.
Zakia Appa remembers that the people who stormed her house and forced her husband to go out were the same youngsters whom she had fed biryani to in Bakrid just 10 days ago. Or 8 days ago, I can't remember exactly. Yeah, I don't know. It was, but it's this. It's the mindset, that the training, and that's through the Concerned Citizens Tribunal, which I referred to in passing, which was one of the most important things that CJP did, which is constitute the tribunal, and Justice Krishna and Justice Sawant headed it. Justice Suresh was part of it. Aruna Roy was part of it. Tanika Sarkar also. We actually got people who had participated in the training camps of the RSS in Swaminarayan Mandirs to depose. And those testimonies are chilling, because it's like you could be talking to us today and tomorrow you could be doing what they did in 2002. Because the kind of hatred, and it's that we need to really deal with long term. How do you deconstruct what is being systematically propagated?
And sometimes without you realizing. It's being injected in your system very, very slowly. Anand read this portion, I was going to talk about it. You got beaten up, CBL, you got beaten up. And
I didn't actually get beaten, I got attacked.
Attacked 5 times. That's exactly the question I'm going to ask. Why do you mention all this so casually in the book? You say, I got attacked and the driver left me, my family was worried. And then you move on. Why are you so casual about it?
I don't know.
But I'm a reader, I'm dissatisfied. Very dissatisfied. On a serious note, why
I don't know, maybe
has it become, no, this is important. Is it because you think that is not important?
No, I think one of the armors I built around myself was to not let that become the narrative. Because I felt that if you let that become the narrative about your being beaten up and every time, so I file an FIR every time. I'd make sure I file an FIR every time. I went to the DGP's office every time. So I didn't take it casually in the sense of the process of whatever. But I just felt if one kept advertising it and speaking about it, one could have done that. I just felt it would have maybe given more, it would have served their purpose, which is what they were doing. It was Justice Verma actually who mentioned it first time publicly at one of the award functions in Bangalore when he gave the speech, because he was there once when I was attacked. His car was in front of mine. We were entering Godra on 22nd of March 2002. And I think but for the fact that his car was there, something worse could have happened. And he got his people to come and sort of, because the highways were like crazy. The highways were like completely taken over by goons. And for months, this business about 3 days and 6 days is rubbish. Till KPS Gill was brought. KPS Gill was sent by Vajpayee on 5th or 6th of May 2002.
So
Months. The VS hospital in the center of Ahmedabad, horrific things happened there all through April and May with Muslim patients. I mean, it's a shame that so much of this gets lost in the wider. And we couldn't fight all these many aspects of the violence, no? You end up fighting the individual trials, you end up fighting maybe one large case like the Zakia Jafri case, which is command responsibility. But the fact that the hospital becomes a war zone, and that Muslims just felt they were not safe in that hospital. Malika had to intervene, Malika Sarabhai had to intervene because she's on the trust of that hospital. We had to call upon her because horrific things were happening.
The reason I had actually asked that was when one reads a newspaper report about your case or about some case, some other case that's going on at the moment, we don't even know. I was just informed that your accounts freezing case is going on. But whenever we read, and assuming that most of it is true, given that journalists, when we read, it's a flat two-dimensional report. But I've always wondered, for example, Teesta, that what happens when you land at the airport in Ahmedabad? What happens when your car comes? What happens when you go to a place? You're a notorious person there. There must be people who must be terribly, itching to kind of do something.
Actually, it's quite scary. When it's quite scary going
So,
there.
what happens?
It's also scary because of in the established structures, like when you say airport, when you talk about the police, when you talk about, say, the hotel or the club where you stay, because I stay at the sports club. Now the sports club doesn't want me to stay there anymore because of the CBI.
See, now this kind of...
Now, last few times they've not given permission, so we have to go to another hotel. And hotels are not as safe as a club, So all these years we were staying in a club because Suhail, our lawyer there, is a member. So these things it's not a very pleasant thing to be because you're marked out, and television does that, in fact, because constantly showing your face, no? Earlier you had, with only print, it was possible to be a little anonymous. Now with television you can't be. And I think they deliberately kind of flash the face more and more. I also feel at the ordinary level of the Ahmedabadi and the Baroda person and Himmatnagar and all, not everybody is hostile. But it is the structures which there are enough people who would not like to. There are many things at one point we'll say about the Gujarat judiciary, which I can't say now, because one is vulnerable. One is very vulnerable. So even if but I'll say this much, that even among the better judges, they're too scared to take a stand if the name of CJP or our names are involved. So this is what happens, I believe, when you have very as you say in Hindustani, chote dil or chote dimag ke log in positions of real power are doing this, and they've sent a message down the line.
Do people come up to you and shake your hand in Gujarat? Has that happened?
Oh, yeah.
Are there people who really feel... No, are there people who really feel you are doing something worthwhile?
I think so. There are. Don't ask me which community in the next question. There are enough people from, I think, all quarters who feel that. But there is also an overwhelming fear. And this is something people don't understand. That, there are these spaces where one always went. IIM, IIT, NID would occasionally call you for discussions. That has completely dried up now. Cedric Prakash, who's also a trustee of CJP, is now not there in Gujarat anymore, but he would continuously trying to bridge this and have gatherings where there'd be professors and teachers and photography students, etc. So when such occasions are created, there'll always be people. But I think more and more I find quote-unquote civil society, NGOs are not doing this. Forget with me, with anybody. There's just a complete paralysis of activity there. And you have very brave hearts like Rohit Prajapati, we've lost Trupti now, who are really doing a sterling job in Baroda. So, it also depends, Sidharth, in which section you're working with. I find the lower middle class, rural sections much easier, much easier. Mobility is easier, conversations are easier. But in the middle class, in the hardened section, the funniest is the High Court. It's possibly the most hostile area.
When it should be a safe space. Now, the book has got only 3 chapters, by the way. Again, a complaint from a discerning reader. It could have been much thicker, but I'm thankful that you've written it. Chapter 3 begins by you talking about how you were summoned and you were sure that you were going to be arrested. So I think that day, I think you should elaborate a bit on that, because that's the latest that people do remember.
July 2015. Yeah. That it was both Javed and me, and we were going to the CBI court, which is opposite the university, and Esplanade. And I don't know, the hearings had been on, and they'd been adjourned a couple of times. And I just because one has the opportunity to say it, I just want to say it here that 68 cases CJP has filed against the state and perpetrators, and 9 cases have been filed against us, 7 against me, and now 2 against Javed and me both. And in the most vicious, which is the last 2, at worst the offences, even if they were committed, which we staunchly deny, are civil offences. I mean, they should have actually been tackled in civil litigation, but they've all been criminalized. That is something, again, journalists don't point out. That is, again, something media doesn't point out.
That's too subtle a thing for a journalist to understand.
But since you're giving me the chance, I'm just saying it. So, my point being that, we shouldn't be seeking bail for these kind of cases. So anyway, the arguments had been on in the CBI case, and there had been 2 adjournments, and it was a Friday. Now, all these things are very important, because lock-up, Friday, weekend, where will you be taken? All those questions. And somehow that morning, I didn't say this to anybody, but I had this feeling that it's not going to be a very good day in the CBI court. Mihir and our wonderful team, I hope some of them are here, they said they'll come. Mihir and his entire team of Vijay and Vinamr and all had immediately made preparations to appeal to the High Court, which is fortunately what saved us that day, because we got the stay immediately.
So they too were briefed and prepped?
Yeah. Everybody was. In fact, we spent half an hour in Mir's office and we discussed. There was a whole band of people, many of whom are in this room over in the court with us. And it was very tense. And he kept delaying the hearing. And as it became 2:40, 10 to 3, I said, this is getting very close to even the High Court finishing. And he's obviously going to deny the bail. So that's the feeling I was talking about. And that's when that happened, I somehow told myself, if he does it, I'm going to go and address the court. Now that's something which everyone would say never should do. But I just felt I had to do it.
And so he did deny. And then...
So when he denied it, I just walked up to the court and I said, I don't know, I mean, I have to respect your decision because it's a judicial decision, but I don't know if you know, you've put me and my family in complete threat of our lives by taking this decision. It's a very unfair decision. I think that caused a lot of confusion because immediately the CBI said, why is she addressing the court? And there was a lot of confusion in that minute, and that's when Mihir and our lawyers told us that we're now moving to the High Court.
And
many things I can't say in between.
No, of course. Again, we have to rely on the papers. But it's close to something like that happening at any time, would you say?
Like that?
No, I mean an arrest.
Can it happen still? Now they're talking about doing communal harmony through education. We have been doing through coach, and then
Yes.
television channels run 1-hour programs saying that she's generating hate speech. So there can be one more FIR tomorrow. And it's almost as if this government and administration has very little else to do. And it's certainly not done much.
Well, I think it is doing a lot, except that it's not doing what governments ought to do. But so, where do you see now this going forward? The cases, Zakia Zafri's case, the other cases, your own situation. Where do you see? Also, combined with that, do you see many people who would have been maybe with you at one time, or even if they weren't, were sympathetic to your cause, beginning to say, let bygones be bygones? Has that thought entered people's minds at large, people at large?
See, I think the intention of the perpetrators and the state agencies were to divert a lot of our energies and attention in defending ourselves, which we've had to do. So I think now good 25-30% of our times are devoted to countering the charges, to fighting the cases. Fortunately, we've managed to summon up the reserves to keep at fighting the cases against the state, whether they are in appeal in the High Court or the Zakia Jafri case, which is at the moment in the final stages in the High Court. The next hearing is on 31st March. So it's extremely, apart from the anxiety and the tension and the cost that it takes, it's also meant diversion of that attention. And like Anil said and you said, accounts have been frozen, and we've been just extraordinarily lucky in the fact that our entire trust board has stood so firmly behind us. Nandan is here, Anil is here, Cyrus, everybody, Alek, Padamsi, Kadri Saab, all of them. And they have actually, because they're also, by the way, very exacting trustees, as they should be. So it's not something. Ravi Kulkarni said that the method of maintaining accounts, and Javed does a lot of that very meticulously.
So they ask you tough questions.
No, it's not a question of tough. The procedure laid down is very tough. So there's not much can really go wrong. It's been exactingly put down that you do it in this way. So you have only a limited amount which is discretionary. You only do it that way. So therefore the charges are completely ludicrous. So, but anyway, the moment our accounts were frozen in January 2014, we took a decision as a trust board to open fresh domestic accounts, which is completely allowed under law. And then a huge section of Indian donors have kept the CJP work going, And I feel very happy to say this because of my background, that many of them are Bombay lawyers, top lawyers in Bombay who've actually contributed to allowing us to function. Otherwise, we'll have a closed shop. So that's been the positive, okay? But there are, I think nobody has really, from the public at large, nobody has really said let bygones be bygones. They've tried to say maybe that think about your safety, think about how much you want to risk, how far you want to go. But nobody has said let bygones be bygones. There are some people who I don't want to name here who have not wanted to support the trusts like they did in the past because of the changing of dispensation at the sector.
So ultimately the message I'm getting from your book and from your work and from you is memory cannot be allowed to lapse. And that's critical, that memory cannot be allowed to lapse. There's, various things may happen, the world changes, but that horrendous event before that, 92, 93, Sri Krishna report, as you know, gathering dust, and it's ridiculous for us to say Shiv Sena government threw it into the dustbin because subsequent governments never bothered to pick.
2 elections. 2 elections were won by Congress NCP saying they'll implement Shri Krishna Commission.
And they didn't. So memory has to be kept alive. And is this part of what you think that you are adding to this nation's memory and making sure that people remember these things?
I think, for a lasting social peace and for a healthy society and for healthy living, you need to be able to acknowledge wrong. And this is wrong. It's really wrongdoing we are talking about, wrongdoing of a very, very basic kind. And society has to offer some reparation for it, some justice for it. For me, some of the things which may not even have come in the book, which I keep thinking of bits which I should have put in. What really haunts me is when I go to mohallas or the things which experience communal violence, and you hear of certain families or certain groups of people who've not gone through this for the first time, Sidharth.
Yes.
This is the 3rd or 4th time that they're being displaced by this mass violence. And what does this mean? How do you cope? You're living in a perpetual state of siege, perpetual state, and then you are going to have a sense of victimhood. Then you're going to be not completely healthy in your outlook, no? But then who's responsible for that?
So let me tell you.
So the same Gulbarg Society, I might tell you, Nishrin and Tanveer, Ehsan, they're the names. The Gulbarg Society is more than just the Jafri family. They went through 69 also.
Yes. So let me tell you a small personal anecdote which will add to this. So I'm busy doing research about some aspects of this city, which I think is changing fundamentally in front of us. And I have spent the last 7-8 months going to people in Dongri and other places. There is complete shutdown of memory, complete shutdown. People do not want to talk. The youngsters never saw it. Their parents never talked to them about it. But it's a survival instinct. And so you can talk about it. Sri Krishna is there. Newspaper reports, occasionally, by the way, every now and then on December 6th and after that, mention it. Newsrooms are full of youngsters who have no clue that something like this happened. So this shutdown of memory is what really bothers me. That there will come generations and there will be a time in which somebody is going to write a book to say 2002 never happened. Or 92, 93 never happened, because somebody who was 1 year old at that time has no idea. And so I think what you've done is really commendable, with great clarity of purpose, great clarity and great clarity of writing, because we are journalists. I must say your old journalistic, I see the fluidity. So I congratulate you and thank you very much for this discussion. And I think there are people sitting here and wondering when I'm going to keep quiet and they want to ask questions. But I'm a bit of a dictator when it comes to moderating, so I'm going to say one thing. Short questions, please, and statements can be held for a bit later. Thank you. Thank you, Teesta. Sorry. Please, a question.
In fact, a couple of things which are very important, like her meeting, President Abdul Kalam, and giving him a Tamil version of her finding, that she has not spoken. She has also not spoken about Maya Kodnani's role. She has also not spoken about the judge which delivered her threats, because we need to know what exactly those things.
Yes. You have not spoken of so many things. Here, it's in the book, but we did not discuss it. But sir, it is in the book, I must tell you. Anyone else? Yes.
Hi Teesta, needless to say I'm a big fan of what you do, what you stand for. And one of the questions that I have is, Hindutva comes from Hindu families. What are elite Hindu educated families doing today to change their mindsets? And I think to a large extent law, police is all a reflection of that. I say so because I come from a family that publishes a magazine called Sarita. We publish many other magazines called Caravan, Women's Era, Grey Shobha. And we keep asking these questions from within us. I'm a Hindu, I'm a upper caste Hindu. What are we doing to our families? What are we teaching our children? Why are we doing these practices of Janayu? Why do we have a patriarchal system where women are not allowed on boards? And that kind of creates that divide in our society. And on one side we're talking constitution, but nobody in India, and especially mainstream media, is not talking what are Hindu families doing to reform themselves.
You want to talk about it?
You've touched.
I think the answer was contained.
Self-contained, and it's very, very important. I'm so glad you raised it. And just to say that one other part of my work, our work, is also to do with COAJ, which is our education program, which is not so well publicized as the legal work. It's something we've been running since.
That's in schools.
In schools. I refer to it also in the book. And that's hugely energizing for me personally, because this work can be very searing, it can be very difficult. But when you work with children, and we've been trying to do that now since 1994, and we have our own website also, coachedu.net. Please have a look at it. We are trying to look at this issue of how prejudice, bias, lack of dialogue should be introduced in the classroom space, in the community space, because I think children are dealing with conflict within the family, within the mohalla, within society, and they need to be actually exposed to how to tackle it. That is what Khoj has been trying to do. I'm not saying it's adequate or enough, but it is one small effort. And I think there should be many, many more such. Because we tell the kids to take questions back to their families, ask these questions and stuff.
Speaking of family, one of the things you mentioned in 2002 when you were traveling, you had begun to travel, your children were very, very small, they must have grown up. How have they grown up watching you in many of these circumstances?
Mustn't have been easy, can't have been easy, no.
Also on some trip, each time you were on a trip?
Horrible, the phone, and not just the phone, but anxiety on the phone. It's not like just taking a business call or having but every call would be a crisis, almost. Even when we were trekking, I remember in 2007 we went trekking almost to the base camp, Mount Everest. We didn't make the last trek, but I think we stopped at Tamboche or something, short of the base camp, and all along the way there were calls. And this is a huge issue. This is the cost actually for the struggle for justice. When the state doesn't do what it's supposed to do, that witnesses need hand-holding. The survivors need emotional and other support, and that is what CJP has given them. Apart from the 172 convictions, which I think is historic. I mean, that's one thing that people, I realized yesterday, and I told myself, this is 15 years of Gujarat next week. Monday and Tuesday will be 15 years of Godhra and Gujarat. And that 15-year anniversary is not going to be commemorated the way it ought to be.
Even thought of?
Not even thought of, because of the dispensation in power in Delhi. And, the issue is that we managed to get 172 convictions, which has never happened in the history of communal violence, that you get these convictions. And I think that is the measure of the integrity of the work that CJP and its entire band of lawyers has done. And, but it's not just fighting a case. It means that 570 witnesses, that just like I have CISF protection, my young men are here protecting me. There are 570 witnesses in Gujarat who've been given protection by the Supreme Court in their villages, in their day-to-day work. That's the formal protection. But, they have problems every day. They're being threatened. They're living in the same neighborhood where Maya Kodnani has now been given bail. Bajrangi has been given temporary bail. So these are the calls you keep getting, and the fact that they have your number is some sort of tasalli that they can reach out to. And the moment they have your number, there's always overreach. There'll be that extra call which you have to take, and then the kids' memory is full of those calls. Tamara, Gibran, both.
But also behind every great woman is a supportive husband.
I've said that throughout the book.
Question?
Teesta here.
Sorry.
You just spoke about this complete shutdown of memory.
Sidharth.
I just want to ask you, Teesta, in Behrampada yesterday, Shiv Sena candidate, Muslim candidate won. So can we say that Behrampada has completely forgotten what happened in 92, 93, it's complete shutdown of memory of the entire area?
I just saw one report which told me how many Muslim candidates had won across the city, and I was happy to see that there were many. Quite a few, and many were also from the Congress and NCP, and many are from the Shiv Sena and other parties. See, one of the major problems we are facing is a whole crisis of the core political secular party. And I don't want to take one party's name. Obviously, the Congress will have to take more than its share of the blame. But I think that entire secular political space is just not looking at these issues that should be looked at. I mean, today our student leaders in HCU, in JNU and DAU, they are the opposition in the country. They are the real opposition to this regime. But the political parties, even the left, just formally supports them here and there, but is not on the streets on the issues. When the JNU students are being suspended for the UGC notification of a month ago, they are fighting for representation of OBC and Dalit students and minority students in higher education. It's not being seen. Media is not showing it. Neither is the political class showing it. So the problem is, coming back to your question, I'm sorry I've diverted, why will a Muslim candidate from Behrampada not go to the Shiv Sena if he or she feels that the mainstream political party is not giving him or her representation? That is the real problem.
So does Shiv Sena become secular and BJP?
Well, may I just at various micro levels, the Shiv Sena works very closely with communities.
Yes, Much closer than the Congress has been.
If you go to Behrampada, which is more or less a Muslim slum,
Thank you.
you will find the many of their small petty requirements, getting a card done, admission, this, that, and the other, water connection is done by the Shiv Sena. So that connection is there.
Unlike the RSS and BJP.
Yeah, which doesn't do that. So when you have a party which does that, and as I've said, people may have forgotten, younger people may have grown up, etc. They put a Muslim there because it's a Muslim area, and he'll win. Yes, Anil.
Hypothetically, if after the Sri Krishna report came out, I actually recorded Bal Thackeray at Shivaji Park saying that, not Manoj Joshi saying, he was chief minister at the time, saying that I will not arrest Thackeray, I'll resign, but I will not arrest Thackeray. And Thackeray said that if I'm arrested, Bombay will burn, and whoever arrested me will throw them in the fire. So whoever puts me in jail should stay in Bombay, because then they'll be thrown in the fire. Now, hypothetically, supposing he had been arrested, I personally don't think that there would have been this huge turmoil. It might have been a temporary turmoil, but we would have been safer as citizens had the guilty been punished at the right time. And this goes not just for Bal Thackeray, this goes for what happened in 1984 in Delhi and the perpetrators of the Sikh pogrom. So are there examples in the country where justice was done? I mean, you managed to put 172 people behind bars, at least temporarily. I don't know if they are all behind bars now.
Yeah. Except 2 of them all are this.
Okay, but are there examples where people in high office were punished for their role in communal violence?
No. Which is why the fact that Bajrangi and Kodnani are the names that everybody knows in Arora Bhatia, but what people don't know is that out of these 172 people that we keep talking about that CJP managed to get convicted, for me the greatest satisfaction was when the Sardarpura convictions happened. Sardarpura is a little village in Mehsana, and the Patels who are in jail, I mean, as all of us know, they're a very, very powerful political and economic community. And in a village situation,
Locally they are extremely powerful, those people.
No, and in a situation of a village, imagine the Khet Mazdoor is the Muslim, and the owner of the farm and the large landowners are Patels. And they are the ones who perpetrated. And by the way, the Pathans, who were better off, just hid away. See, there was a whole class dimension to the whole thing also. The Patels against whom the Khet Mazdoor deposed are in jail even today, not out on bail. And that has sent a huge message. Even one of the, Hardik Patel, if you remember, in the middle of all this, wrote to Modi saying that release the Patels from Sardarpura and Ode and all that, if you want to negotiate with us. So the point is that the big names are these two. She was a former minister and an MLA. But among these 172, what gives us some satisfaction is that they were not taporis, no? Like in the 84 guys who were prosecuted and jailed, the Sikh riots, are all the local foot soldiers. Not Bhagat, Sajjan, none of those, Sajjan Kumar, whatever. So the tragedy in our country has been that not only are the perpetrators not being punished, but what the example you gave is a shocking example of inflammatory, insightful speech. And the courts ought to have taken suo motu action. When I don't know if you remember Thackeray's statement on 28th of June 1992, Sidharth. Sant Jansata used to come out, the evening edition of Ansata, and I remember the headline, मैं कोर्टों के फैसलों पे लघु शंका करता. I piss on the judgments of courts.
I think you talked about it.
Yeah. And no action, no contempt. So I think this is, when you go back and backpedal all the time. And our courts have backpedaled hugely on communal violence and caste violence.
Couple of more questions. Yes, please. Yeah.
My name is Paritosh Joshi. I think we seem to have moved from a place that allowed liberal discourse, debate, and dissent. Are we in a situation where the voices of liberalism, openness, and debate are perpetually in retreat, or is there, I mean, because unfortunately I'm going to leave this room feeling depressed. So is that the only emotion that we are stuck with for all time to come?
Teesta, that's locked to you. You've got to answer.
No, I don't think. I think if we're going to leave depressed, then we should stay a bit longer. We can't afford to leave here depressed. I mean, let's face it. And one of my greatest feelings is that we just cannot afford to be depressed. No, I mean, I don't know. I find a huge sense. A couple of things. I find a huge sense of hope from our young. I mean, it's been said in different ways, but look at what our students are doing. I mean, and I don't know, I'm not talking about just Kanaya and Srela and, I mean, Rohit. I mean, I'm talking about the fact that there's a whole body of resistance in our universities who are not caving in. But are we, not just the political class I've spoken about, but are you and I giving them the support that they need? We are established, we are older, we can afford to give them this thing. And I'm appealing to all of you here, please give that 2 hours a day to break the climate of fear, to ensure that liberal space is restored or strengthened. I don't think it's gone away completely, but step out of Bombay and Delhi, go to the Kasbah towns, and it's much more hopeful there. People are fighting in different ways. I mean, I can give you a little example. You have AMU will get, I mean, that's back to the media, completely a different topic. But Aligarh Muslim University mein ladkiyon ko nahi padhne dega, will make headlines. Banaras Hindu University is the most casteist and communal university. No non-veg for girls, because you'll suddenly get very, very sexually active, You have an RSS vice chancellor there, and that doesn't make the headlines. There's two, I was in Banaras, my book was released there also, in a lovely hotel in Assi Ghat. And there are I was asking, some professors came, and there are 2,500 professors, Sidharth, in BHU. And they are not supporting their students. There's only a handful who are. So I think we have, as adult citizens, as people who are established, we should ask ourselves, what are we doing to restore that space? And some of us are stupid. We are infinite for the 24/7 hall. Javed, I don't even give Javed a choice if he wants a few hours of rest. But please, other people, give that 2-3 hours a day. I think we're taking what's happening too lightly. Far too lightly.
Or feeling frustrated. I mean, that sentiment is also there. Yeah.
It's only through action that you'll get less frustrated, not by sitting and griping about it.
Sorry, one more.
Hi, Teesta, I was wondering, is everyone here aware of Shiv Sena having a new finger called Mense, which has now become a political group? And do we know what Mense's agenda is? First question. Second question is, do you know about Mense?
MNS?
Yeah, Mense,
Okay.
they call it Mense. The second...
Mansa.
The second question is, when you see the build-up happening, as you researched and you went through the process and you saw that it was a build-up, it was not sudden. I see a lot of burning fires happening almost every day, and they're all very critical. And I've tried talking about it, and I find the educated and the uneducated both blasé about it, and it's a very, very serious issue where everybody's lives are concerned. What is the advice you give the person where it's not legally? There are people who are talking in Delhi who have come and spoken in Bombay, but everybody is not there where I have reached. What I'm trying to say is there are very burning critical issues which people don't know and don't care about. In spite of telling them, they don't understand the seriousness. What can we do in that situation when you see the build-up, you're doing what you can, and still people are not receiving? Thank you.
More or less. Yeah, but maybe.
No, I think we have to just figure out ways to affect people. I think we need to get out of just the talking and the frustrated mode. It could be frustration, it could be despair, it could be the sense that nothing is going to change. But we need to just get out of that. And I mean, this is what we keep telling people, that in your little zones, whether it's in your professions, in your housing society, I mean, we just have to do something at every level. At every single level. The one thing we didn't cover, which I just want to bring up, is away from everything else, is that one of the strongest things about combat and the growth of this journey together, Javed and me, has been the fact that just as we talk about constitutional values and the fact that the veering towards a majoritarian state, Javed has been equally perturbed and consistently perturbed about minority communalism.
That's right.
And the democratizing
I
and the
think you
secularized. So
you
I wanted
should. Yes,
to talk,
please.
because that's one thing, it's in the book and I wanted to bring it up, that is what made combat also, communalism combat also special, because you're not only speaking about majoritarianism, you're talking about majoritarianism wherever it comes from. So I recall that I mentioned this also, that when he was deputy editor of Sunday Observer, a piece he wrote in Siyasat, a piece he wrote in Sunday Observer, which was translated by Siyasat, was when the Babri Masjid thing was building up. And he was one of the few people who kept writing and saying that Babri Masjid Action Committee should not be at the forefront and it should be left to secular India to tackle, not to make it into a Hindu-Muslim issue. And that was one instance I recall. The other instance I recall is that consistently talking about minority communalism, whether it's on gender, whether it's on dissent.
Well, Haji Ali for one thing.
That is more recent, but I'm saying
Yes.
from the inception, from the inception, that was something that calibrated combat, that gave it a certain consistency, integrity and depth. And also the issue of caste. Because I think we were one of the few intellectual journalists from the liberal secular fold that actually began to understand a few years after we started publication that you cannot tackle communalism without looking at caste in this country. And I think there's still a huge lacunae among the secular liberals in that direction.
Well, if Anuradha allows, we'll have a discussion one day on the failures of the left in understanding what caste is. And I'm sorry to say, many of them are my friends and yours too. But I think they are still living in 1963, more or less. And they haven't understood, because even today...
Which decade is RSS living?
1763. On that note, Teesta will be around. Sorry, one last question. Yeah, sure. Sorry, please. I think, would you take a mic, please?
All this talk of despair, Teesta and all of us lost a beloved brother, I think in the last 12 months, Father Daniel Berrigan. And he was asked by a supercilious TV fellow that, oh, Father Berrigan, everything that you worked for, nothing has, you've not won any of your fights. So he said, of course not. He said, till I don't stop trying, I have not lost.
Wonderful.
Fingers in the book as well.
Thank you very much. Teesta is around. Teesta, I'm going to plug your book. Please buy it and get it signed.
Thank you.
Why didn't you sign mine?